Wait! You can't do this!
It's private property now.
Please open up!
Most people dream about inheriting a ranch, but when my grandfather passed away and left me his Texas property, I had no idea my life was about to change forever. I expected open fields, cattle, old barns, and miles of peaceful land. Instead, I inherited a mystery that had been hiding in plain sight for years. My name is Jack Walker. I am 40 years old and I have spent my entire life working with my hands instead of sitting behind a desk. I never cared about luxury neighborhoods, expensive houses, or homeowners associations. I believed that if you respected other people and stayed on your own land, life would stay simple. The ranch covered thousands of acres and had been in my family for generations. My grandfather bought the land decades before the nearby towns started expanding. Back then there was nothing except dirt roads, cattle, and endless fields stretching toward the horizon. As the years passed, developers built new neighborhoods closer and closer to the ranch. My grandfather rarely talked about those changes. Whenever I asked him about the houses near the eastern fence, he would smile and tell me that every piece of land has a story, and one day I would understand what he meant. 2 weeks after the funeral, I moved into the old ranch house and started organizing years of paperwork. Most of the documents were exactly what I expected. Tax records, equipment receipts, cattle registrations, and faded family photographs filled dozens of dusty boxes. I almost threw away one old leather folder because it looked empty from the outside. Something told me to open it one last time. Inside I found yellowed county maps, hand-drawn boundary sketches, and several letters written by my grandfather nearly 20 years earlier. One sentence immediately caught my attention. The eastern access road belongs to the ranch and must never be surrendered. I read that line 3 different times. It made no sense. The eastern road was now a smooth paved street leading directly into a beautiful HOA neighborhood filled with luxury homes. Families drove across that road every day without anyone questioning who actually owned it. I spread the maps across the kitchen table and compared them to modern satellite images on my laptop. At first I assumed the old documents were outdated. Then I noticed something strange. Every original survey showed the same property line. The road passed straight through ranch land that legally belonged to my grandfather. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. Either every map from the county archives was wrong or something had been overlooked for decades. The next morning I drove into town and visited the county records office. The clerk smiled politely as she searched for the parcel numbers listed on the old maps. A few minutes later her expression changed. She quietly disappeared into another office before returning with a senior records manager carrying several large archive books. Either of them spoke for almost a minute. Finally, the manager looked at me and asked where I found those original surveys. I explained that they came from my grandfather's personal files. He slowly nodded before placing newer county records beside the originals. The property descriptions matched perfectly. The parcel numbers matched perfectly. The ownership history matched perfectly. The only thing nobody had questioned for decades was the road itself. According to every official document in front of us, the land beneath the only entrance and exit used by the entire HOA neighborhood had never been transferred to the developer. It still legally belonged to the Walker Ranch. For a moment the room felt completely silent. I asked the manager if there had been some mistake. He shook his head and said mistakes happen, but official deeds are what courts recognize. Then he gave me advice I will never forget. Before you tell anyone about this, hire a property attorney. Do everything by the law. And whatever you do, never make assumptions until every survey has been verified. I thanked him, gathered copies of every document, and walked back to my truck. As I drove toward the ranch, I looked at the neighborhood from the public road. Children were riding bicycles. Neighbors were walking their dogs. Families were leaving for work through the same entrance they had probably used for years. None of them had any idea that the road beneath their tires might legally belong to someone they had never even met. I pulled over beside the old wooden ranch fence and looked toward the entrance. For the first time I realized this was no longer just an inheritance. It was the beginning of a battle that could change the lives of everyone living behind that gate.
This line shows your boundary.
It's always been our land.
I barely slept that night because the county records kept replaying in my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same survey maps spread across the table. If those records were correct, then one forgotten piece of paperwork had quietly shaped the lives of 50 families without anyone realizing it. I knew one thing for certain. I could not make a single move until every inch of that property had been verified by professionals. The following morning I drove into Austin and met with Rebecca Lawson, one of the most respected property attorneys in Texas. Her office walls were covered with framed land surveys and legal certificates. She listened carefully without interrupting while I placed every original document across her conference table. She studied each page with incredible patience. Nearly 20 minutes passed before she finally looked up. "These are original county surveys. They appear authentic. If everything here is accurate, then you may own one of the most valuable access easements in the entire county." I asked her if that meant I could simply block the road. She immediately shook her head. "Not yet. The law protects property owners, but it also protects due process. If we rush this, we could lose everything. If we do this correctly, nobody will be able to challenge the facts." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. Rebecca immediately contacted a licensed land survey company with decades of experience handling complex ranch boundaries. Within 2 days, a professional survey team arrived at Walker Ranch carrying GPS equipment, laser instruments, and historical county maps. For the next several days, they worked from sunrise until sunset. They measured fence lines, located original survey markers, compared satellite coordinates, examined old easement records. Every measurement was recorded twice. Every boundary was verified. I watched quietly from a distance because I knew emotions had no place in a legal investigation. Facts would decide everything. Late Friday afternoon, the lead surveyor asked if we could speak privately. He unfolded a fresh survey map across the hood of my pickup truck. The new measurements perfectly matched the documents my grandfather had protected for years. Then he pointed toward the entrance road leading into the HOA neighborhood. "According to every legal measurement we completed today, this entire access road remains inside your recorded property boundary. Nobody ever completed a legal transfer. Nobody ever recorded a permanent public easement. The developer built the neighborhood assuming ownership would eventually be corrected. It never happened." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. The surveyor finally handed me the certified report. "Congratulations, Mr. Walker. You officially own the only vehicle access road serving 50 HOA homes." I thanked him, but I did not celebrate. Owning the road was one thing. Handling what came next would be far more complicated. Rebecca immediately filed certified copies of the survey with the county records office. Everything was now officially documented. There would be no questions about authenticity. No missing signatures. No uncertain boundaries. Every legal requirement had been completed exactly as Texas law required. 3 days later, something unexpected happened. A white luxury SUV slowly entered the ranch entrance and stopped beside the old fence. A woman wearing an emerald green blazer stepped out carrying a leather portfolio. She looked around the ranch with complete confidence before walking directly toward me. Without introducing herself, she smiled politely. "Good morning. I am Melissa Carter, president of Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. I understand you have been asking unusual questions about our neighborhood." Her voice was calm, but I could already tell she believed this conversation would end on her terms. I introduced myself and invited her to sit on the ranch porch. She refused. Instead, she remained standing while looking toward the neighborhood behind her. She explained that the HOA had plans to expand landscaping near the entrance and wanted permission to place decorative stone walls along the road. I looked at her for several seconds before asking one simple question. "Do you know who owns that road?" She smiled without hesitation. "Of course. The neighborhood has used it for years. That tells me everything I need to know." I quietly opened my leather folder and removed one certified survey map. Melissa glanced at the document for only a moment before laughing softly. Old maps do not change modern reality. People live here now. Nothing is going to change. She closed her portfolio, turned around, and walked back toward her SUV without asking another question. As she drove away, Rebecca called my phone. I answered immediately. Her first words made my stomach tighten. Jack. Melissa Carter just hired one of the largest law firms in the state. It looks like the HOA already knows something is wrong. And I think they are preparing to fight. I looked toward the entrance where her SUV had disappeared behind the neighborhood gate. At that moment I realized this was no longer just a property dispute. It had become a battle between decades of assumptions and legally recorded facts. And neither side was willing to back down. 3 days passed after my meeting with Melissa Carter, and the ranch felt unusually quiet. The survey crews were gone and every legal document had already been recorded with the county. I spent my mornings repairing fences and feeding cattle while pretending everything was normal. Deep down I knew the silence would not last much longer. On Monday morning a black luxury SUV stopped outside the ranch gate. A man wearing an expensive navy suit stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. He introduced himself as an attorney representing Silver Creek Estates Homeowners Association. Without wasting a second he handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a formal demand letter. The HOA claimed that my survey was inaccurate. They claimed the entrance road had become community property through decades of continuous public use. They demanded that I immediately withdraw every county filing and sign legal documents recognizing the HOA as the rightful owner of the road. If I refused, they promised to take me to court. I looked at the attorney and calmly asked one question. Have you personally reviewed the original county deeds? He hesitated for a brief moment before answering. My clients believe they have a strong legal position. That was not the answer I asked for. I thanked him for delivering the documents, and wished him a safe drive back to town. Less than an hour later Rebecca Lawson arrived at the ranch. She read every page of the demand letter without showing any emotion. When she finished she closed the folder and smiled for the first time since this entire situation began. This is exactly what I hoped they would do. I looked at her in confusion. She explained that the HOA had built its entire argument around assumptions instead of recorded ownership. They talked about habits. They talked about expectations. They talked about years of use. But they failed to produce a single recorded deed transferring ownership away from Walker Ranch. Rebecca leaned forward and pointed to the county seal on one of my original documents. Property law begins with recorded ownership. Not assumptions. Not opinions. Not popularity. That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the day. Within 24 hours the lawsuit became public. Someone inside the HOA shared the story on local community pages. The headlines painted me as a greedy ranch owner trying to trap innocent families. My phone started ringing. Some callers wanted to hear my side. Others accused me of trying to destroy the neighborhood. A local television station even requested an interview. Rebecca advised me to politely decline every request. Let the facts speak inside the courtroom. Not on social media. The following weekend I drove past the entrance to the neighborhood. For the first time residents recognized my truck. Some stared. Some whispered. A few even pointed toward me. One older man walked over and introduced himself. His name was Daniel. He had lived there for almost 15 years. He quietly admitted that nobody in the neighborhood had ever seen a document proving who actually owned the entrance road. Everything they believed came from what previous homeowners had told them. He shook my hand before leaving. Whatever the truth is, I hope the court finds it. That simple conversation reminded me why I refused to hate the residents. Most of them had simply trusted the information they were given. The real conflict was not between neighbors. It was between legal records and years of unchecked assumptions. A week later Rebecca called with new information. The HOA had hired expert witnesses, professional planners, traffic consultants, property analysts. They were preparing for a long legal battle. Rebecca smiled while reviewing the list. The more experts they hire, the more they will eventually have to explain why none of them can produce a recorded deed. I admired her confidence, but I also understood the pressure ahead. Court cases are never won by emotions. They are won through preparation. Over the next several weeks, we organized every document into chronological order. Every survey, every tax record, every ownership transfer, every historical photograph, every county filing. Nothing was left to chance. One afternoon, while reviewing old aerial photographs, Rebecca suddenly stopped turning pages. She slid one photograph across the table. "Look at this." The picture had been taken almost 30 years earlier, before the neighborhood existed. A narrow dirt ranch road crossed the exact location where the modern entrance now stood. There were no houses, no sidewalks, no security gate. Just open ranch land. The photograph matched every original survey perfectly. It was another piece of evidence proving the road had always belonged to Walker Ranch before developers arrived. Rebecca immediately ordered certified copies for the court. 2 days later, the judge officially scheduled our first hearing. The courtroom date was finally set. As I folded the notice and placed it inside my leather folder, I looked out across the ranch toward the distant neighborhood. In just a few weeks, everything would change. One courtroom, one judge, one decision, and 50 families would finally learn whether the road they had trusted for years had ever truly belonged to them. The morning of the first court hearing arrived with a cold Texas sunrise and a feeling that today would decide far more than a simple property dispute. Rebecca Lawson met me outside the courthouse carrying 2 large document cases filled with certified records, surveys, historical photographs, and legal filings. She looked completely calm, which gave me confidence, even though I knew the people waiting inside believed I was about to lose. The courthouse parking lot was already crowded with reporters, local residents, and several homeowners from Silver Creek Estates. Television cameras stood near the entrance, hoping someone would make an emotional statement before the hearing began. Rebecca quietly reminded me of our plan. No interviews. No arguments. No reactions. Only facts. As we walked through the courthouse doors, I noticed Melissa Carter standing near the security checkpoint, surrounded by 3 attorneys wearing expensive suits. She greeted several reporters with a confident smile before looking directly at me. She wanted everyone to believe she had already won. I simply nodded politely and continued walking toward the courtroom. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere felt serious and professional. Homeowners quietly filled the public seating area while county officials prepared boxes of official records requested by the judge. At exactly 9 o'clock, everyone stood as Judge Eleanor Brooks entered the courtroom. She had served on the county bench for more than 20 years and had a reputation for refusing to tolerate emotional arguments or courtroom drama. After everyone was seated, the judge reviewed the case summary before inviting the HOA attorneys to present their opening statement. Their lead attorney confidently approached the podium. He argued that the neighborhood had relied on the entrance road for decades. Families had purchased homes believing permanent access existed. Emergency vehicles, school buses, delivery companies, and utility providers all depended on that road every single day. He claimed that removing access would unfairly punish innocent homeowners. Several residents quietly nodded as he spoke. The presentation sounded convincing. Then the judge asked one simple question. "Can you show the court the recorded deed transferring ownership of the road from Walker Ranch to the developer?" The attorney paused. He shuffled through several binders before finally admitting that no recorded transfer had been located. Instead, he argued that continuous public use should establish permanent rights. Judge Brooks wrote a short note without showing any emotion. Then she turned toward Rebecca. "Your response." Rebecca calmly stood and carried one certified county record to the podium. She placed the original survey beside a modern survey completed only weeks earlier. Then she displayed certified ownership records dating back more than 40 years. Every document carried official county seals. Every survey identified the exact same property boundary. Every ownership record listed Walker Ranch as the legal owner. Rebecca spoke slowly and clearly. "This case is not about public opinion. It is not about assumptions. It is about recorded property ownership. No deed exists transferring this road away from my client. No permanent easement exists benefiting the Homeowners Association. Every official document before this court confirms one continuous chain of ownership. Walker Ranch? From the original purchase until today. The courtroom became completely silent. Judge Brooks carefully examined each survey. She compared parcel numbers. She reviewed historical aerial photographs. She even asked county officials to verify several original recording dates. Nearly 30 minutes passed before she finally looked toward both legal teams. The evidence presented raises serious questions requiring independent verification. Therefore, this court orders a complete neutral survey inspection supervised by county engineers and independent land experts. Neither party may alter the property until that investigation is complete. Melissa immediately leaned toward one of her attorneys. They appeared surprised. I could tell they expected a quick ruling. Instead, the judge had ordered a completely independent investigation that neither side could influence. As the hearing ended, reporters rushed toward the courthouse steps hoping someone would comment. Melissa confidently told reporters she remained certain the HOA would prevail once the investigation was complete. Rebecca quietly smiled while placing the certified surveys back into her document case. She whispered something I will never forget. Independent experts cannot change recorded history. They can only confirm it. 2 days later, the county officially announced the investigation team. Professional survey engineers, historical land record specialists, transportation planners, and one retired state property commissioner. Every expert had been selected by the court instead of either legal team. For the first time since this battle began, nobody could accuse either side of controlling the evidence. As I drove back toward the ranch that evening, I passed the entrance to Silver Creek Estates. Children were still playing outside. Neighbors were mowing their lawns. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But I knew something they did not. Within a few weeks, independent experts would measure every inch of that entrance road. And whatever they discovered would permanently change the future of 50 homes. The court-ordered investigation began exactly 1 week later. Before sunrise, several county vehicles entered Walker Ranch, followed by survey trucks carrying advanced GPS equipment, drones, laser scanners, and historical mapping tools. Every expert introduced themselves before starting their work. There were no reporters. No lawyers giving speeches. No emotional arguments. Only professionals searching for the truth. The lead survey engineer explained that every measurement would be completed twice using modern satellite positioning, and then compared against historical county records that stretched back more than 50 years. Every stake placed into the ground would become part of the official court record. I stood quietly beside my truck while the survey crews spread across the ranch. Some walked the old fence lines. Others searched for original iron survey markers buried beneath decades of soil and grass. A drone slowly lifted into the morning sky, creating a detailed 3-dimensional map of the entire property. Every movement was carefully documented. Around midday, another group arrived at the entrance road. Melissa Carter stepped out of her SUV wearing the same emerald green blazer she had worn since our first meeting. 3 HOA attorneys followed closely behind her. She greeted the survey team with confidence, and reminded them that families had depended on that entrance for years. The chief engineer listened politely. Then he answered with a calm, professional voice. We are not here to decide who deserves the road. We are here to determine who legally owns it. Melissa smiled, but I noticed it was no longer the confident smile she carried into the courtroom. As the afternoon continued, the engineers uncovered several original iron survey pins hidden beneath layers of dirt near the eastern fence line. One of the younger surveyors carefully brushed away the soil before calling the chief engineer over. The old metal marker still carried the original county identification number stamped into its surface. The chief engineer compared the number with the historical survey records. It matched perfectly. That single marker had remained untouched for decades. It quietly confirmed the exact property boundary my grandfather had protected all those years. The survey crews continued working until sunset. The following morning they returned with excavation equipment designed to locate additional historical markers. By noon they had discovered every original survey monument shown on the oldest county maps. Each one lined up with remarkable accuracy. Rebecca arrived shortly after lunch carrying fresh copies of every certified document already filed with the court. She watched the engineers compare the modern GPS coordinates with the original survey notes. One by one, every measurement confirmed the same conclusion. Nothing had changed. The boundaries had always been exactly where the original records placed them. Late that afternoon, something unexpected happened. One of the historical land specialists requested access to a storage room inside the county archive building. Several hours later, he returned carrying a worn leather ledger covered in dust. Inside were handwritten development records dating back to the construction of Silver Creek Estates. Most of the pages contained routine planning notes. Then the specialist stopped turning pages. He quietly removed one folded document tucked between two old reports. The paper was an unsigned road transfer agreement prepared by the original developer more than 20 years earlier. The agreement described the exact entrance road leading into the neighborhood. But one important section remained completely blank. The signature line for Walker Ranch had never been signed. The transfer had been drafted. It had been prepared. But it had never been completed. The specialist immediately sealed the document inside an evidence folder. Rebecca looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. She did not celebrate. She simply whispered, "This changes everything." The chief engineer reviewed the unsigned agreement together with the certified surveys and historical property records. Then he slowly closed the file and looked toward the entrance road where dozens of homeowners continued driving through the neighborhood completely unaware of what had just been discovered. He removed his glasses and spoke quietly enough that only a few of us could hear. The original owner never gave this road away. For several seconds nobody said a single word. Even Melissa stood completely still. Her attorneys immediately requested copies of the newly discovered document. The chief engineer refused. Not until the official investigation report is submitted directly to the court. Everything remains confidential until then. As the sun disappeared behind the hills, the survey crews packed their equipment and prepared to leave. The investigation was officially complete. Now every expert would return to their offices and prepare one final report. A report that could decide the future of 50 homes. As I locked the ranch gate that evening, I looked toward the neighborhood lights glowing in the distance. For years everyone believed the entrance road belonged to the HOA because nobody had ever questioned the paperwork. Now the paperwork had finally answered back. The official investigation report was delivered to the courthouse exactly 12 days after the survey teams completed their work. Every page was sealed until both legal teams arrived. Rebecca called me early that morning and asked me to meet her before the hearing. She sounded calm, but I could hear something different in her voice. For the first time since this battle started, she sounded confident enough to believe we were close to the truth finally being recognized. When I reached the courthouse, several reporters were already waiting outside. News about the independent investigation had spread across the county. Homeowners from Silver Creek Estates filled the sidewalks hoping someone would explain what was happening. Some still believed the HOA would win. Others were beginning to wonder why the case had lasted so long if the neighborhood was truly right. Melissa Carter arrived a few minutes later with the same group of attorneys. This time she did not stop to speak with reporters. She walked straight into the courthouse while avoiding every question shouted in her direction. Inside the courtroom, Judge Eleanor Brooks opened the sealed investigation report in complete silence. No one moved. No one whispered. Every person in the room waited for the first page to be read. The judge slowly reviewed the executive summary before handing copies to both legal teams. Rebecca quietly read the first several pages. Then she closed her eyes for a brief moment and smiled. Across the courtroom, Melissa's lead attorney turned page after page at an increasing speed. His confident expression slowly disappeared. The report contained over 100 pages of technical measurements, historical evidence, certified photographs, satellite analysis, and legal references. Every section pointed toward the same conclusion. The original Walker Ranch boundary had never changed. The entrance road remained inside the legally recorded ranch property. No executed deed had ever transferred ownership. No permanent easement had ever been recorded. No county document contradicted those findings. The courtroom remained completely silent as Judge Brooks summarized the investigation. The independent survey confirms that the recorded property boundaries are accurate. The historical ownership records are authentic. The original survey monuments remain in their recorded locations. The court recognizes these findings as credible evidence. A quiet murmur spread through the public gallery. Several homeowners looked toward Melissa in complete disbelief. One elderly resident slowly shook his head while reading the report in front of him. Another couple whispered to each other before looking back toward the judge. For the first time, people were no longer questioning whether I actually owned the road. They were questioning how nobody had discovered the truth sooner. Melissa's attorney quickly stood and argued that removing access would create unnecessary hardship for innocent homeowners. Judge Brooks nodded respectfully. Then she answered with complete professionalism. Hardship does not erase legal ownership. The court must first determine ownership before discussing possible remedies. That single sentence changed the entire atmosphere inside the courtroom. Rebecca stood and requested permission to introduce one final piece of evidence. The judge approved. Rebecca walked toward the evidence table carrying the unsigned road transfer agreement discovered during the county archive investigation. She placed it beside the original development records. Then she explained exactly what everyone was seeing. The developer prepared the paperwork required to purchase the entrance road. The agreement was never signed by Walker Ranch. Without that signature, ownership never legally changed. The room became so quiet that every page turning inside the courtroom could be heard. Judge Brooks carefully examined the unsigned document before asking the county records manager one direct question. Has this agreement ever been completed or replaced by another recorded transfer? The manager answered immediately. No, Your Honor. Our records contain no completed transfer, no replacement agreement, and no recorded easement. Judge Brooks slowly placed the document back onto the evidence table. She thanked the independent investigators for their work and announced a short recess before delivering the next stage of the proceedings. As everyone walked into a hallway, the atmosphere felt completely different. Reporters were no longer chasing me. Instead, they surrounded Melissa and her attorneys, asking why the HOA had claimed ownership without recorded proof. Melissa refused to answer. She simply continued walking with her head lowered. A few homeowners approached me cautiously. One middle-aged man introduced himself as Michael. He apologized for believing the rumors spread during the first weeks of the lawsuit. He admitted that many residents had trusted the HOA leadership without ever asking to see the legal documents. Several other homeowners quietly agreed. None of them blamed me anymore. They wanted answers from the people who had managed the neighborhood for years. Rebecca watched the conversations from a distance. Then she quietly said something that stayed with me. The truth always moves slowly. But once it arrives, nobody can stop it. A few minutes later, the courtroom doors opened once again. Everyone returned to their seats. Judge Brooks reviewed her notes one final time before looking across the courtroom. Her voice remained calm and steady. The court has reviewed the independent investigation, the certified surveys, the historical records, and the evidence submitted by both parties. Based on the findings presented today, this court is prepared to issue its preliminary ruling. The entire courtroom froze. Even the reporters stopped writing. Nobody knew what the next sentence would be. And in that moment, the future of 50 homes depended on the words that were about to leave the judge's mouth. Nobody inside the courtroom moved. Judge Eleanor Brooks looked across the room one final time before reading the first part of her decision. Based on the independent investigation and the certified county records, this court finds that Walker Ranch remains the recorded legal owner of the entrance road serving Silver Creek Estates. A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. Several homeowners looked at each other in complete disbelief. Melissa Carter slowly closed her eyes. Her attorneys immediately began writing notes, while searching through their legal files, hoping they had overlooked something that could change the outcome. Judge Brooks raised her hand and the courtroom became silent once again. This ruling does not remove access from the residents today. However, the court recognizes Mr. Walker as the legal property owner unless new evidence proving otherwise is presented. Until the final hearing, both parties are ordered to preserve the current condition of the property. No construction. No alterations. No interference. Rebecca calmly thanked the court. Melissa's attorneys immediately requested additional time to locate historical development records that might support their position. The judge approved a limited extension but made one important statement before ending the hearing. If no recorded transfer exists, this court will rule according to the law and not according to assumptions. That sentence echoed through the courtroom long after everyone stood to leave. Outside the courthouse, the atmosphere had completely changed. This time the reporters did not run toward Melissa. They ran toward Rebecca. Camera crews surrounded her asking whether Walker Ranch had officially won the case. Rebecca answered carefully. Today's ruling confirms ownership. The final hearing will determine the legal remedy. We respect the court, and we will continue following every legal procedure. No celebration. No dramatic speeches. Only confidence. As we walked toward my truck, several homeowners quietly approached us. The first was Daniel, the same man who had spoken to me weeks earlier. He extended his hand. I owe you an apology. We believed what we were told. We never asked to see the paperwork. I shook his hand. None of this was ever personal. I never wanted families to lose their homes. I only wanted the truth to be recognized. Daniel nodded before returning to the neighborhood with several other residents. For the first time, I noticed something different. People were no longer standing behind Melissa. They were standing together asking questions. Questions she could no longer answer. That evening, Rebecca visited the ranch carrying a thick folder labeled Court Compliance. She explained that because ownership had now been officially recognized, the court would allow me to take limited steps to secure my property without blocking emergency services or violating the temporary order. Every action had to be approved. Every improvement had to be documented. Every expense had to be recorded. I agreed immediately. The next morning, licensed contractors arrived at the ranch. They measured the entrance, inspected the existing fencing, reviewed engineering drawings. Nothing looked unusual to anyone driving past. But every person working there knew exactly what they were preparing. A new reinforced steel security gate. Not to trap anyone. Not to punish anyone. But to protect legally recognized private property exactly as the court allowed. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than I expected. Residents gathered near the entrance watching engineers place temporary survey stakes along the roadside. Melissa arrived shortly afterward. She demanded to know what was happening. The lead contractor politely handed her a copy of the temporary court authorization. She read the document twice. Her face became noticeably pale. She immediately called one of her attorneys. Nearly an hour later, the attorney arrived and reviewed the same paperwork. After reading every page, he quietly lowered the document. Everything appears to comply with the court order. Melissa looked at him in disbelief. There has to be something we can stop. The attorney slowly shook his head. Not unless the court changes its ruling. For the first time since this battle began, Melissa had no answer. No speech. No confident smile. She simply returned to her SUV and drove back toward the neighborhood. 3 days later, I received a phone call from the steel fabrication company. Your custom gate is finished. Delivery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I thanked them and ended the call. Early the next morning, the sound of heavy diesel engines echoed across the ranch. A massive flatbed truck slowly appeared over the hill carrying a giant black steel gate nearly 20 feet wide. Behind it came another truck loaded with heavy support posts, hydraulic equipment, and reinforced locking mechanisms. The morning sun reflected across the fresh black steel as the convoy rolled toward the entrance road. Workers climbed out of their trucks and began unloading the equipment. Residents gathered behind the neighborhood entrance, watching silently. Nobody spoke. Nobody argued. Everyone simply stared at the enormous gate that now rested only a few feet away from the only road connecting 50 homes to the outside world. And for the first time, every person standing there understood exactly what legal ownership could look like. The sunrise over Walker Ranch felt different that morning. The air was quiet, but everyone knew something important was about to happen. Long before the construction crews arrived, residents from Silver Creek Estates had already gathered near the entrance. Some stood on the sidewalks while others watched from their driveways. Nobody knew exactly what they were about to witness, but everyone understood that this day would become part of the neighborhood history. At exactly 7 o'clock, the convoy of construction vehicles rolled toward the entrance road. The massive black steel gate rested on a heavy flatbed trailer surrounded by cranes, welding equipment, and concrete trucks. Every contractor wore company uniforms with county inspection permits displayed inside their vehicles. Nothing about the operation looked rushed. Everything had been carefully planned. Rebecca Lawson arrived carrying another folder filled with certified court documents. She personally handed copies of the installation permits to the county inspector assigned to supervise the work. Within minutes, the inspector approved the construction schedule. The crew immediately began preparing the foundation. Large holes were drilled beside the entrance. Steel reinforcement cages were lowered into the ground. Concrete slowly filled each foundation, while engineers checked every measurement with laser equipment. Everything was recorded. Everything was photographed. Everything followed the court order exactly. Melissa Carter suddenly arrived in her white luxury SUV. She stepped out before the vehicle had completely stopped. Her expression showed something I had not seen before. Not confidence. Desperation. She walked directly toward the construction foreman, demanding that every machine stop immediately. The foreman remained calm. "Ma'am, we are operating under a valid court authorization." Melissa pointed toward the workers. "You cannot block 50 families inside this neighborhood." Rebecca quietly stepped forward. "Nobody is blocking anyone today. The existing access remains open while construction is completed. This installation follows every instruction issued by the court." Melissa immediately called her attorney. Within 30 minutes, 3 attorneys arrived carrying briefcases filled with legal documents. They reviewed every permit, every engineering approval, every inspection certificate. Every page matched the official court authorization. One attorney slowly lowered his paperwork before speaking quietly. "Everything appears legally compliant." Melissa looked at him in disbelief. "There has to be an emergency motion. There has to be something." The attorney simply remained silent. By midday, the enormous steel support posts stood firmly in place. Workers carefully lifted the giant black gate into position using 2 cranes working together with incredible precision. The entire neighborhood watched without speaking. Children stopped riding their bicycles. Lawn mowers became silent. Even passing traffic slowed to watch. Nobody had ever imagined that the entrance they used every single day would become the center of a courtroom battle. As the installation continued, another convoy arrived. This time it was the county sheriff department. Several patrol vehicles parked beside the entrance while Deputy Sheriff Tom Harris stepped out wearing his tan uniform and brown cowboy hat. He greeted both legal teams before requesting copies of the court order. Rebecca handed him the certified documents. Melissa's attorney handed him theirs as well. Sheriff Harris spent several minutes reading every page. He compared signatures, verified case numbers, checked the inspection approvals. Finally, he closed the folder. "Everything being done here is authorized by the court. As long as construction follows these conditions, there will be no law enforcement interference." Those words ended every remaining argument. Melissa slowly stepped backward without saying another word. The final welding was completed shortly before sunset. The giant black steel gate now stood across the entrance like it had always belonged there. Engineers completed the safety inspection. County officials signed the final construction report. The temporary barriers were removed. Everyone stood quietly waiting for the final demonstration. The construction supervisor walked toward me carrying a small electronic control box. He smiled politely before placing it in my hand. "Mr. Walker, the system is ready. Whenever you are." I looked toward Rebecca. She gave a small nod. Sheriff Harris stood nearby watching carefully. The homeowners remained completely silent behind the entrance. I pressed the control button once. The hydraulic motors slowly came to life. A deep mechanical sound echoed across the valley. The massive steel gate moved with perfect precision until it reached the center of the entrance. For just a few seconds, the entire road stood completely closed. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound came from the hydraulic locks securing the gate into position. Then, exactly as required by the temporary court order, I pressed the button again. The gates slowly reopened. Traffic resumed normally. Emergency access remained available. Nothing unlawful had happened. But everyone watching had just witnessed something they never believed possible. The legal owner of the road had demonstrated complete control over the entrance. Melissa quietly looked toward the neighborhood behind her. Then she looked back at the gate. For the first time since this battle began, she seemed to understand that this case was no longer about winning. It was about accepting a truth that had existed long before any of the houses were ever built. As the sun disappeared beyond the Texas hills, I locked the control box inside my truck. Rebecca closed her legal folder. Sheriff Harris shook my hand before returning to his patrol vehicle. The steel gate reflected the final light of the evening, while 50 families stood silently on the other side, wondering what the judge would decide at the final hearing. The morning of the final hearing arrived with a feeling that was impossible to ignore. Nearly 3 months had passed since I first opened my grandfather's old leather folder and discovered the forgotten county maps. What began as a simple inheritance had become one of the most talked about property disputes in the county. Every newspaper wanted the outcome. Every local television station waited outside the courthouse. But inside the courtroom, none of that mattered. Only the law would decide what happened next. Rebecca Lawson arrived carrying the same worn leather document case she had used since our first meeting. Every page inside had been reviewed dozens of times. Every survey had been verified. Every certified record had already survived independent investigation. She looked at me and smiled. Today we stop proving what is true. Today the court decides what the truth means. We walked into the courthouse together. This time something felt completely different. The public gallery was filled almost entirely with homeowners from Silver Creek Estates. Many of them looked nervous. Several quietly nodded as I walked past. Weeks earlier, many of those same people believed I was trying to take something away from them. Now most of them understood I had never started this fight. I had simply defended property my family legally owned. Melissa Carter entered the courtroom a few minutes later. She looked exhausted. The confidence she carried during our first meeting at the ranch had completely disappeared. Her attorneys quietly reviewed their notes, while avoiding eye contact with the residents sitting behind them. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered the courtroom exactly on time. After everyone was seated, she thanked both legal teams for their professionalism throughout the case. She also thanked the independent survey experts, county officials, and historical records department for their work. Then she invited the HOA attorneys to present any final evidence before the court reached its decision. The lead attorney slowly walked toward the podium. His voice no longer carried the confidence it once had. He admitted the independent investigation confirmed Walker Ranch remained the recorded owner of the entrance road. However, he asked the court to consider the financial impact on homeowners who purchased their properties believing permanent, unrestricted access existed. He argued that innocent families should not suffer because of mistakes made by developers decades earlier. When he finished, Judge Brooks thanked him. Then she turned toward Rebecca. Rebecca stood without carrying a single new document. Everything that needed to be proven had already been proven. She spoke calmly. This case has never been about punishment. My client never asked the court to remove families from their homes. He never demanded compensation. He never interfered with emergency services. He followed every legal instruction issued by this court. He respected every resident even while defending his own property. The responsibility for this situation belongs to those who built and managed this neighborhood without completing the legal transfer required by law. Rebecca returned to her seat. The courtroom became completely silent. Judge Brooks reviewed her notes one final time. She looked toward the homeowners before speaking. Many of you sitting here purchased your homes honestly. You relied upon information provided during those transactions. Nothing in today's decision questions your good faith. However, this court cannot rewrite recorded property ownership simply because time has passed. The law protects ownership through documented evidence, not through assumptions, not through habit, not through convenience. Several homeowners quietly lowered their heads. Some closed their eyes. Others simply stared toward the floor. Judge Brooks continued. The court therefore recognizes Walker Ranch as the legal owner of the entrance road. The court further orders all parties to begin mediation within 60 days to negotiate a permanent recorded access agreement that fairly protects both the property owner and the homeowners. Until such an agreement is reached, Walker Ranch retains the legal authority recognized under Texas property law subject to all existing court conditions. A deep silence filled the courtroom. Nobody celebrated. Nobody argued. Everyone understood they had just witnessed the end of a legal battle that should never have happened. Then something unexpected occurred. Daniel slowly stood from the public gallery. He asked the judge for permission to speak. After receiving permission, he turned toward me. Mr. Walker, on behalf of many families living in Silver Creek Estates, I want to apologize. We judged you before we knew the facts. You protected your rights without ever treating us like enemies. Thank you. Several other homeowners quietly stood beside him. One by one they applauded. It was not loud. It was respectful. Even Judge Brooks allowed the moment to continue for a few seconds before restoring order. Across the courtroom, Melissa remained seated. She stared silently at the table in front of her. For the first time since becoming HOA president, she realized leadership was not about winning arguments. It was about accepting responsibility. As everyone prepared to leave the courtroom, she slowly walked toward me. She extended her hand. I accepted it. She spoke quietly. I should have listened the first day we met. I believed confidence could replace evidence. I was wrong. I simply nodded. The fight was finally over. But the story was not quite finished. Because the most important decision would happen back at the ranch, where 50 families would soon discover what I intended to do with the only road connecting their neighborhood to the outside world. The courthouse slowly emptied as people walked outside into the warm Texas afternoon. Reporters rushed to file their stories while television cameras packed away their equipment. For everyone else, the case was finally over. For me, it was only the beginning of a new responsibility. The following week, Rebecca Lawson met me at the ranch with the official court order and the signed judgment. Every page had now been recorded by the county. The ownership question had finally been answered forever. She smiled before placing the documents inside my grandfather's old leather folder. Your grandfather protected this ranch for decades. Today you finished what he started. I looked toward the eastern entrance where the black steel gate stood quietly beneath the morning sun. For weeks people had assumed I planned to lock everyone inside the neighborhood. That had never been my intention. The gate was never built to punish families. It was built to protect property that should have been respected from the very beginning. 2 days later, representatives from Silver Creek Estates requested a meeting at the ranch. This time Melissa Carter was not leading the conversation. Several homeowners came together, including Daniel Michael and a few other residents who simply wanted to find a peaceful solution. Melissa quietly stood behind them. She listened instead of speaking. Daniel stepped forward. We know the court confirmed your ownership. We also know our families still need this road. We are asking if there is a way to move forward together. I looked around at the people standing in front of me. These were not developers. These were not lawyers. These were parents, grandparents, teachers, firefighters, nurses, and retired veterans. Most of them had never seen the original paperwork until this lawsuit exposed the truth. I nodded. There is a way. But it starts with honesty. Rebecca opened a prepared agreement that had already been reviewed by county officials. The proposal was simple. Walker Ranch would grant a permanent recorded access easement protecting every homeowner's ability to enter and leave the neighborhood. In return, the HOA would officially recognize Walker Ranch as the legal property owner. Future maintenance responsibilities would be clearly defined. No future HOA board could claim ownership. No future landowner could create confusion again. Everything would finally exist in writing. The homeowners carefully read every page. Daniel signed first. Then Michael. One by one, the remaining representatives added their signatures. Finally, everyone looked toward Melissa. She slowly stepped forward. She held the pen for several seconds before quietly signing the agreement. When she finished, she looked directly at me. I spent months trying to prove I was right. You spent months proving the records were right. There is a difference. I smiled and offered my hand. This time the handshake felt different. It was not the end of an argument. It was the beginning of mutual respect. Several weeks later, county workers installed a new sign near the entrance. It read, "Private Access Road. Permanent easement granted by Walker Ranch." The words were simple, but they told the entire story. Every family entering the neighborhood now understood the history beneath the pavement they crossed each day. Children continued riding their bicycles. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. School buses arrived every morning just as they always had. Life returned to normal. Only now it rested on truth instead of assumption. One quiet evening I walked toward the steel gate as the sun disappeared behind the Texas hills. The hydraulic system slowly opened, allowing a family to drive home after a long day at work. A little boy sitting in the back seat smiled and waved as they passed. I waved back. That moment reminded me why I had fought so hard. Justice is not about taking something away from innocent people. Justice is about protecting what is right while giving others the chance to move forward. Before leaving, I placed my grandfather's old leather folder inside the ranch office safe. His final lesson had never been about land. It had been about responsibility. Documents matter. Promises matter. Truth matters. And no matter how much time passes, the truth always finds its way home. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more incredible HOA battles based on property rights, legal disputes, and unforgettable endings, please support the channel by liking this video, subscribing to HOA Reality 365, and turning on notifications so you never miss the next story. I would also love to know where you are watching from, because it is always amazing to see how many people around the world enjoy these stories. Thank you for spending your time with me. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember that patience, preparation, and the truth will always be stronger than arrogance.